Okay, let's start off on page 274, because I'm on page 273, where we stopped last week. 274. Everybody got books? Hopefully. Ready? Okay, continuing to read from the Interpreter's Dictionary. On pages 110 through 111, we find evidence of another ancient custom, now veneered with Christian respectability. Now, remember what we're talking about here. We're talking about, this chapter is about birthdays, okay? Why the celebration of birthdays, idolatry, and abomination. And it shows how devil worship was, if you're not worshiping Yahweh, of course, you're worshiping Satan. And so, Satan worship is involved in all aspects of people's lives. And this is one of them, when people celebrate birthdays. So, reading from here, it says, it was the early agricultural religion which formed the fundamental and most permanent stratum of Roman religion. Because agriculture, you had to have agriculture in order to live, right? You had to be able to, so everything was based upon the agricultural system. Remember, that's where all the gods and the goddesses were. There was a goddess of this grain, goddess of that grain, and so forth, and the god of the sun and the moon, and all of these different things. So, the god worship that was involved in the agricultural system was very strong. Like I said, it permeated the stratum, or it was the core of the Roman religion. Now, with the Etruscans and the Greeks, they had some temples and they had some statues of gods, and which is conceived now as personal beings and been human in form, and divinations and mythology, because people made themselves into gods. Exactly what Yahweh said, don't do. Don't make yourself into a god, but people will worship. Remember, Pharaoh was worshipped as a god, right? So, the new emphasis had a transforming effect upon the religion of the city dwellers, though the old ritual survived in the rural districts. So, the old people, and I remember it was the same with the Catholic religion too. Whenever they changed it, it was always the Trinidadian. The Trinidine. I think it's called the Trinidine form was when you had the Latin. They said everything in Latin, and the priest had his back turned to the people, facing the altar. Well, you remember with the Ecumenical Council, the Second Ecumenical Council and stuff, they kind of started changing things around and different things later on. And they went to where they started putting part of the Mass in English, and then they also had the priest turned around where he was actually facing the congregation and stuff. And boy, the old people, the old Catholics, raised hell about that. They didn't like that at all, because you were messing with their religion. You changed, even though they didn't understand the word they were saying when they went to Mass, mumble jumble in Latin, but still, you fooled around with their religion. Well, this is kind of like what he's talking about here, is that in the rural areas, they just kind of like stayed however they wanted, But the city dwellers began to change a little bit more and take on certain things. Well, it says the offering of a young lamb to the spirit resident. The offering of a young ram to the spirit resident in spring, and a few flowers and so forth. These were things. It always astounds me the way that Satan always uses things. She counterfeits everything that Yahweh does. Yahweh Yeshua was called the Lamb, who was sacrificed, and yet Satan used the same kinds of things in the religion, so that when people, again now, think about what took place. Christianity, okay? Christianity was nothing more than the ancient religions, but they just took on, when they went to a place, and instead of making them stop worshiping their gods, they just took on the worship of the gods straight into Christianity and just gave it a Christian name and a Christian concept and stuff. And so you can see that in the minds of the people, it was so easy for them to accept these things because it was something that they could relate to. So even when you think about Yeshua as a lamb of Yahweh, and these pagans worshiping the lamb and stuff, in their minds it'd be like, well, yeah, we worship the same God, because you call him the lamb, and We sacrifice a lamb and stuff. So in their minds, it had a similarity to it, which kept the confusion going as well, because they couldn't tell the difference between the two. But there was something that was similar there. And that's the way Satan always works, is she tries to make things appear in a person's mind that's something that they can relate to. And that's the reason why the worship of the agricultural gods and goddesses was such a strong thing in the minds of the people, because it's something that's related to every day of their lives. You know, you ate, you worked out in the fields and so forth. So, let's see. Okay, so a young lamb to the spirit resident in the spring, a few beans or flowers offered up to the nymph and so forth, and a family ghost. Okay, now it says here the pious observance. Notice, pious observance. Make it look like it's really something, you know, of ancestral customs. And see, that's the thing, is this goes back. Now remember, ancestral refers to your ancestors, okay? So it's ancestral customs. It's customs that kind of like a dual meaning, basically, because of the fact that it was something that was passed on from the ancestors. But also, remember, it also had to do with ancestral worship, okay, because they worshiped the dead. The same thing that you see the Catholic Church do today when they worship the saints. It's really no different. But it says the pious observance of ancestral customs, such as a ritual, okay, of the communal law or laws. All that is nothing more than guardian spirits, okay? And the family genius, which is another guardian spirit, and the penance, that was guardian spirits as well, of the household storehouses, okay? So they prayed to these gods, and they had these gods and these goddesses thinking that they were going to take care of them and that they were going to keep everything okay for them, you know? Because somebody had to give them food, right? So remember, Yahweh said, you know, it was I who gave you these things, and yet you gave the honor and the glory to Baal instead of to me, knowing that I was the one who gave you these things. Now it says, within these obscure phrases, it's within these obscure phrases that we find the origin of our modern birthday celebrations. And this is amazing stuff here. Yes, through this primitive ancestral customs of pagan Rome, we find our modern counterfeit is still being celebrated today with almost the same rituals. Now the heading here is the ancestral custom of the worship of the family genius. Okay? Reading from the New LaRouche Encyclopedia of Mythology, it says genius. The genius was by declination the creative force which engendered the individual. Now, engendered actually means to produce or to gender, okay, to create and so forth, okay? And this is how close that they were tied in with it, okay? It says the genius. Now, it watched over the person's development and remained with them until the hour of their destruction. In other words, until the time that they died. It was with them all their life. It presided over his marriage and over the nuptial bed, and for this reason being so forth. Okay, it appeared at the birth of the being whose function was to protect. So it was considered as being a protective spirit. The genius was a protective spirit. When a male child was born, then he was turned over to one of the gods. Now the power of the child's genius, okay, depended on luck. It was a boy. If it was a boy, a tutelary spirit, which was tutelary also mean having guardian, okay. A guardian spirit was a genius. If it was a girl, it was a Juno. So immediately when they were born, either male or female, if it was a male, then you had a genius spirit that was supposed to guide you all of your life and influence all of your life, okay? If it was a female, then of course it was Juno, okay? Now, and you can see how, you know, the worship of astrology, how it influences a person's lives, and it has to do with the sun and the moon and the planets and their positions and all this kind of stuff. You can see all this stuff plays into all of this. It's nothing more than just a spin-off of these things. Now, little does the modern world realize today that when they celebrate the birthday of a child, they are in fact dedicating the god to a pagan demon god. They're dedicating the child to a pagan demon god. Furthermore, in the same pagan birthday rituals, okay, a request is made of that same demon gods to guide and to teach the child. Okay? Now, please keep in mind the fact that these are the same demon gods that opposed Yahweh through the Nimrod system, okay? It goes way back to the time of Genesis, whenever, you remember, Cush rebelled against Yahweh. He set up the Nimrod system, right? So keep that in mind. Continuing on, it says the genius and the Juno did not accomplish their protective mission unassisted. So right there it shows you that, hey, the gods are powerless. That's what the scripture says, right? And it shows they are powerless. You know, they can't do anything on their own. They had many auxiliaries. Then they had all of these that helped them along, okay? The Limmuwdyah presided over the infant's purification. Leviticus, however you want to say it, made it utter its first cry, and then you also had him that taught it to eat and to drink. He kept it quiet in the cradle, and then development to the bones and so forth. So you can see, even as the development, it began to taught it to walk, and then to have intellectual faculties and so forth. So it influenced a person's life from the time that they were born and as they grew up. And they gave this honor and glory to all of these different gods. Okay? Now, you had all of these gods, and yet Yahweh simply says that he is who he is. You know? And remember what it says in Nehemiah 6, 9 verse 6. It says, "You alone, O Yahweh, you have created the heavens, the heaven of heavens and the hosts, and the earth and everything in it, the waters and everything in them, and you preserve them all. The hosts of heaven worship you." Who preserves everything? It's Yahweh who preserves everything, right? Not these gods and these goddesses. These gods and these goddesses are powerless. They can't cause... You know, the scripture says, remember when it says in Psalm that Yahweh saw us in our womb before we were even born, right? Before we were even, when we were a tiny microscopic creature, Yahweh saw the forming of our bones and our bodies and the organs and the brain and everything else. Before nowadays it's even considered as being life, you know. Yahweh sees us in our mother's womb as we grow. Isaiah 45 verse 6, "So that you may know that from the rising of the sun to the place..." Now this is when he's talking to the two witnesses. "So that they may know that from the rising of the sun to the place of its setting, that there is none besides me. I am Yahweh, and there is no other." Okay, so there is no other power. All right, so these gods have absolutely no power and can't do anything. But yet they gave them the honor and the glory, and saying that they were responsible for causing these things to take place. Now, in a word, the genius fostered the growth in all the intellectual and the moral faculties of an individual, of whom it was a kind of abstract double. An abstract double. That's how much and how closely tied in they are today. And that's the reason why people all, you know, in the world will say, "You want to wish me a happy birthday?" Because they're asking someone, not realizing what they're doing, but they're asking someone to, you know, ask their guardian spirit to protect them, to supply them with all of their needs, you know, make them prosperous in the world and all of this kind of stuff. All of these things go on during the time of these birthday celebrations. And yet the people are completely unaware of what they're actually doing. Now the cult referred to the genius as very simple. On the day of birth, it was offered wine and flowers, after which there was dancing. And the genius was first represented as a serpent. Isn't that interesting? First represented as a serpent. Later, the genius of the head of the family was depicted as a man in a toga. He was installed between the pinata and the lar, and with him sometimes appeared the Juno of the wife. Okay, so this would be like their family coat of arms kind of thing, like I guess. Now, of course, when the modern world celebrates a birthday today, most of these people, they don't even know. And in fact, you can say everybody, they don't know what they're practicing, that they're practicing demon worship. If they did, they wouldn't be doing it. But these deceived people merely look upon the custom as being so innocent, right? It's an innocent ritual that they do. They don't think anything about it. And they don't even think about to whom they're glorifying, And they don't think about where it came from either. Now, Funkin Wagner, okay, the Standard Encyclopedia of Folklore, Mythology, and Legend. On page 444, it says genius. Okay, the plural is genie. Okay. In Roman religion, a protecting spirit, especially, okay, the ingenious Roman. Now, this was the protecting part. Okay. When a child was born, you got to remember, a child is completely helpless, and mankind knows that. Mankind knows that a baby can't do anything at all. So immediately when they come out of the womb, okay, they begin to put their trust in these spirits, and they dedicate this child to the spirit, so that the spirit will guide them from the time that they're a little bitty baby, all the way up to the time that they die. Remember, to the time of their destruction. So they completely dedicate themselves over. In a little bit, we're going to read something that's going to show you, get you thinking about why people look at us the way that they do today. Okay? But in the Roman religion, okay, it was a protective spirit. And the Roman belief was comparable to the late Greek concept of demon. Okay? So notice what it's telling you. This was a demon. Okay? This genius was a demon. And to the late Christian belief of the guardian angel. Okay? Now, the guardian angel, that's what the Catholic Church teaches you about, is, the guardian. Everybody has a guardian angel, right? But notice, it says, this is from the Catholic Encyclopedia. Who are the guardian angels? Well, the guardian angel was a heavenly spirit that was assigned by God to watch over each of us during our lives. Now, this is what the genie does, right? This is the genius. The doctrine of angels is part of the church's tradition. Ain't got nothing to do with Scripture. It's all the church's tradition. The role of the guardian angel was both to guide us to good thoughts. I want you guys wouldn't have to worry about that, huh? Works and words to preserve us from evil. Since the 17th century, the church has celebrated a feast honoring them in October throughout the universal church. So notice, the 17th century. What came about around the 17th century? King Jimmy version, right? So you can see how they put these things in there to try and twist this thought and all of this teaching, okay? Now, he has charged his angels with the ministry of watching and safeguarding every one of his creatures that behold not his face. So, if you beheld the face, you don't have to worry about him, right? Well, praise Yahweh, we behold the face of Yahweh, not of God. But kingdoms have their angels assigned to them, and men have their angels. Now, the reason why they say kingdoms have their angels assigned to them is because, you see, they're very crafty in what they do. They always look for different things, and they take things like, okay, Daniel and them were in the lion's den. Okay. Well, if you look and see, it said, how many men were there? How many men were there in the fiery furnace? How many? How many? There was 4. How many human beings were there? And it says he saw, lo, they saw a 4th one like the son of Yahweh, right? There was one Malach. Why wasn't there 3? How come there wasn't 6 people in there? If it's supposed to be a guardian angel for everybody, how come there wasn't 3 of them? One for everybody. They blow that away, that kind of stuff. They don't think about any of these things. But they're very crafty in what they do, because they take a little bit of Scripture and they twist it and they apply it in a certain way, so to get people to thinking about, oh yeah, that makes sense, okay, and then they put it into the doctrine. But notice, it was later, it says, the kingdom have their angels assigned to them, and men have their angels, and these later to whom the religion designates the holy guardian angels. But notice, the existence of guardian angels is hence a dogma of the Christian faith. So they're plainly telling you that the existence of guardian angels is dogma of the Christian faith. In other words, ain't nobody would believe in the guardian angels if it wasn't dogma, okay? If it wasn't part of their doctrine, no one would believe in it. But because it was put in there, then Christianity believes in it. But like I said, too, notice it was the 17th century. It was very, very much later that came about. But it's something that's very strong today because the Catholic Church teaches that everybody has a guardian angels. You know, and they'll have their holy pictures and stuff, and they'll show a person, especially children. You know, they might have a picture of children, a boy and a girl walking, you know, whatever. And then they'll have a big old, huge, tall spirit being behind them. You know, of course, they got wings. You got to have wings, right? Because you got to earn your wings when you go to heaven, right? So you can float around on a cloud. But they have the big being with the big wings, and that's supposed to represent their guardian angel that's watching over them and keeping them safe as they go along. So it's always something that they put in there, but it's just another subtle way to keep that attachment of this genius or Juno attached to the people throughout their life. Because when you get older, the people, you know, in the modern world, okay, wouldn't associate that because we're no longer in the Roman Empire. But a guardian angel, oh yeah, I remember that, being taught that as a child. And in fact, today people still say it, do they not? Somebody would get in a quote-unquote accident or something, and then they'll say, oh, somebody was watching over me. Oh, my guardian angel appeared to me. I saw him, you know, and pulled me out of the car, and I was safe, you know, and this kind of stuff. So it's always stuck in their head, and it stays with them even through adult time. But notice, this was a demon worship, and how it ties in with modern Christianity. Instead of calling it demons, of course, they call it angel. The guardian angels instead of, that sounds better than the guardian demons to them, I guess, no? But keep in mind, that this worship, it didn't originate in the scriptures. It's not written in the scriptures. They can't find it in their own Bibles, okay? But the worship originated in pagan devil worship. And this worship originated to those who oppose Yahweh, okay? And, of course, that's it. Remember, worship is service. If they don't serve Yahweh, they serve Satan. And so they keep these things alive. Now, Yahweh talks about this, and he gives a warning here in Deuteronomy 12, verse 28 through 32. Yahweh says, observe and obey all the words that I command you, so that it may be well with you. Now, notice why he says that. He says, I just want everything to be well with you. So observe what I'm telling you to do so you can have a joyful life. That's all that Yahweh wants us to do. So it may be well with you and with your children, notice. Okay? Also with your children after you, forever. He's always looking out for the benefit of everybody. When you do what is lawful and holy in the sight of Yahweh your Father. When Yahweh your Father, all right, cuts off the nations from in front of you, and that you displace them, and you live in their land, then be careful not to be ensnared into following them by asking about their gods, saying, how do the nations worship their gods? How do they serve them? I will do the same. He says, you must not worship Yahweh your Father in that way. For every abomination to Yahweh which he hates, they have done to their gods. They have even burned their sons and their daughters in the fire as sacrifices to their gods. Actually killing innocent children. Do they do that today? Abortion, right? Look at abortion and see what they do when they pour in the saline solution. The child is burnt completely red and completely burnt up when they pull them out. Whatever I command you, be careful to observe and to do. You shall not add to nor take away from it. You can't add to or take away from what's already perfect, right? Yahweh's law is perfect. Now remember what we read there in Funk and Wagnall's dictionary about the genius, okay? And Now, from Collier's Encyclopedia, remember, it's nothing more than a demon, okay? Now, Collier's Encyclopedia, on the demonology, it says the science and art of religious practice, which pertains to supernatural beings, called from the Greek demons, spirits, or genies. You know how you rub the little lamp and the little genie pops out? According to the type of demonology that was believed in, demons are human souls known as genie. Okay? They're demons. Demons are human souls known as genie. So you can see the connection there. Okay? Man makes himself into a god. And that's really what they did. Because when they dedicated their children to the gods, and the gods were supposed to be with them throughout all of their life, you are servants to whom you obey. Right? So if you make yourself into the image of these gods, and you worship and serve these gods, you are a god. Okay? And that's why the Apostle Shalom said there are many lords and many gods. Some in heaven, some on earth. Okay? Many more than what people just associate with. But we're warned over and over throughout the scriptures to prove the spirits, to see whether they are of Yahweh or whether they are of the devil. And 1 Shachariah 4, verse 1, it says, we find this clearly written, Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits, to see whether they are of Yahweh, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. Test the spirits. Okay? You know how a spirit is tested? An evil spirit, unclean spirit will never, ever claim that Yeshua existed in the flesh. Did you know that? They will never, ever admit that. And that's how we used to test them. That's how we can still test them. They would get a little jumbly, but they would never admit it. That's how you could always tell the spirit was still in a person. They had to be cast out. So notice here, it says that test the spirits, but many false prophets have gone out into the world. Okay, false prophets. Let's stop right there and let's see where the majority of all this stuff comes from. Okay. I put a mark in my book. The book always shuts on me. In the encyclopedia, we know about the Vatican, right? So, in the encyclopedia, in the introduction of the word Vatican, it says it's the territory. Hang on a second. It's the territory of the right bank. Move it over. Move it over. Okay. I got a little small. There you go. Just talk to myself. I'm all right. Okay. The territory on the right bank of the Tiber between Monte Mario and Giancolo, which is generically, whatever. But anyway, you recognize that? That's worship of the god Janus. Was known in antiquity as the Anger Vaticanus. And anger is the Latin word for land. Okay. And owing to its marshy character, the low-lying portion of the district enjoyed an ill repute. They sure did. It was a very disgusting place. Okay, and you got to remember now. Okay, all that area was nothing but a cemetery. Okay, and Rome, most of Rome in that area is built upon the cemetery. Okay, and they built churches on top of the cemeteries, like the St. Peter's Basilica and stuff. You know, there's a bunch of graves, and they still buried their dead popes underneath the facility, right underneath the Vatican, right there in the church. When people come to pray in St. Peter's Basilica, they're going to a grave site, okay? And the dead popes are right underneath their feet down there. And this is where it's always been. And they always built the churches around cemeteries. That was places of worship that they always used. Well, the original name Vaticanus is uncertain. Yeah. That's what the Catholics say. It's uncertain, okay? But some claim, get back. Some claim that the name comes from a vanished Etruscan called Vatican. Okay. So Vatican is a combination of Vatic and nous, okay? Now, the word Vatic, okay, this is from a standard English dictionary. This is Webster's New Riverside Dictionary. Notice the word vat means a large casket and so forth, but notice the word Vatic here. Vatic, okay? It means prophetic or alkalor, okay? Vatican means the official papal residence of the papal government. Vatican City is an independent papal state within Rome. Okay, but Vatic, notice, means prophecy, okay, or having to do with a prophet. Now, the second part, the ANUS, okay, the ANUS is a standard in a standard Latin dictionary, and this is from the New Color and English Dictionary Revised and so forth. But it means, it's from the common noun, okay, it actually refers to, it's used in the ending on a name, okay. But if you notice the very first meaning, an old woman, a hag, okay. So when you look at this word, Vatican, okay, Vatican is the hill on the mountain of false prophets. Okay, and it's mentioned in Revelation 17 about on the 7 hills, right? It has to do with prophecy. And that old hag is that woman who sits on 7 hills. Now, it's interesting because the word hag actually itself really means an ugly or evil-looking old woman. It's a female demon. It's an evil or frightening spirit or witch. Now, this is what's used to describe, okay? This is what's used to describe the Catholic Church. Now, I mean, we're not saying anything against the Catholic Church. We're just simply pointing out to you fact, okay, that anybody can look up encyclopedias and dictionaries and find this stuff out, but they don't, you know, because their minds are so deceived. So when Yahweh said that many false prophets would go out, yes, the many false prophets come forth from the Vatican, okay, and have deceived the people, because that is the ancient Roman religion that keeps these people bound to worshiping these gods. Now you should be able to see the reason why they have all of these saints. Okay? It all has to do with tying in everything for people to be tied in close together, because it's got to be opposite of what Yahweh says. Because in the very beginning, Yahweh said, remember, I have created man and woman so that they can be made into my image and likeness. And Satan said, no, I'm going to make man and woman into my likeness. And from that point on, the God worship began when the fall of man came, and it hasn't stopped. And this is the reason why everything is tied in together with this. That's how deep it is. But, you know, they have no concept of this stuff. And I hope you're realizing how much in depth all this stuff goes. Now, these demonic teachings of worship, they didn't come from Yahweh, of course. They came from the pagan God worshippers. Now, whether they ignorantly or knowingly worship the demon, you know, they're still worshiping a demon. It doesn't matter, you know. You are servants to whom you obey. Now, Matthew 15:14, it says, Yeshua said, let them alone. They are blind leaders of the blind. And if the blind lead the blind, then both will fall into the ditch. You know, so, I mean, if a deceived person is leading another deceived person, they're both deceived. You know? And if one person is not deceived, but he listens to a deceived person, then he's deceived. Okay? Even though he may think he's not. They're both going to fall into the ditch, as it says. Now, a history of private life, from pagan Rome to the Byzantine, what page is it? Pages 197 to 198. It gives us the following information about sacrifices of these demons. It says, the principal rite of every cult was, of course, the rite of sacrifice. Okay, that's what everything was based upon. You know, the ritual had to do with the sacrifice, which people attended in a contemplative mood. Okay, they were always contemplating about it. It's kind of like when you see them, you know, today the Christians, and they get their hands up like this and look at them. They make them holy, you know, when they pray. They want to point those prayers straight up. Take aim, boy. Make sure the fingers are pointing up in the right direction. You know? Contemplative mood, okay? Now, it's important to bear in mind, however, that this is a Greek that in the Greek or the Latin text, the word sacrifice, it always implies a feast. Okay, feasting. Every sacrifice was followed by a dinner in which the immolated victim was either cooked, okay, and eaten, okay? So it had to do with sacrifices. They wanted to put into the mind of the people that you are whom you obey, and you are. And so you can see that all of this stuff was done and being practiced. Now put yourself in the days of Yeshua. This was being practiced in the Roman Empire, okay? So when Yeshua said, eat my flesh and drink my blood, you can see where their minds went, right? Automatically went to this pagan concept of this, the sacrifice, that's what the gods do, you know. How are we going to eat your flesh and drink your blood, they asked him. You know, because to them they were thinking about, they actually did drink the blood of the animals and they ate the flesh of the animals. And so in their minds it was like, how are we going to eat human flesh and drink human blood? But people are so crazy. Now, remember now, if that would have been the case, then Yeshua would have had to die over and over and over and over again, right? Every year he would have to come back and die over again if we had to eat his flesh and blood. You know, that's the craziness of it. But you got to remember now, the whole basics, okay, of the Catholic faith is built upon the Eucharist. And the Eucharist is taking the piece of bread and the cup of wine and changing that piece of bread into the flesh, the literal flesh of Christ, and taking the wine and it changes into the literal blood. So at that time when the priest, and he does this first before the whole congregation, at the altar up there, he's actually performing an act of cannibalism, and then the whole congregation will join in with him and partake of the flesh, okay? And what that does is it's putting part of the God. You're taking the God within you. And that's supposed to make you become more like the God. That's why they used to drink bull's blood, because it made them more like a bull, you know, and the different animals like that. They figured they took on the characteristics of these animals. But that's their mindset, you know. And it's still alive today. It's just as alive today as it was thousands of years ago. You know, so if the prophet could be resurrected and came today and went around the churches, he would see the very same thing within the Catholic Church and would know that was a Roman religion. But now notice here, in this book, in Compton's Pictured Encyclopedia and Fact Index, okay, on page 290, under the word Vesta, it says, the hearth in ancient times was the center of family life. It was a place where the meals were prepared and the family gathered around, okay? So, you know, it was something just like everybody gathers around the dinner table, you know, today, right? Well, the hearth was a place, you know, the fireplace where they cooked everything, and it was a place where the family would gather around together. And above all, it was the place where sacrifices were offered to the gods, okay, so that it came to be regarded as a sacred altar. Now, this was in everybody's own individual home, okay? Now, we know that a sacrifice, even today, do we offer sacrifices? Sure we do. Every time you eat and sit down, a meal is a sacrifice, you know. But in the minds of these people, everything that they did had to be tied in to a god or a goddess, okay? And so it was in their mind very, very strongly. And we'll see in just a little bit how strong this is and why it takes such a toll on people today. Well, continuing here in A History of Private Life, on pages 195 to 197, it says, great temples had kitchens and they offered sacrifices, and they offered the services of the cooks of the worshipers who came to the sacrifice, you know, so they had the cooks there, and they offered their services to be able to cook their sacrifices for them and stuff. And the flesh of the victim went to the participants in the ritual, and the smoke to the gods. Okay, so when the smoke went up, you know, it rose up, that was supposed to ascend it up to the gods, and the meat was given to the participants so they could eat of it. Now, scraps from the meals, they were left on the altar, And the beggars came behind them, and the other ones, they snatched them up, and had something to eat. Now, when sacrifices was made, okay, when they were made on a household altar, okay, they were not made on a household altar, but at a temple. But the custom was to pay for the priest's services. Now, this is still done today. Like in the Catholic Church, if you have, and the other churches too, but like at a funeral, you paid them, you gave them a donation and stuff to the priest. You had a wedding, you gave the priest something. If you wanted to have them a mass said for one of your dead relatives, pay the priest something, and he says a mass in their behalf and so forth. So now remember what the scripture says. Okay, the prophet says that the priest took bribes, right? And that turned their hearts and turned them away from Yahweh. Okay? And so you see that that's exactly what's being done today. And this also has to do with some, with the penances, where you would pay for your sins or to pay to get somebody out of purgatory. Let's see. And scripture left. Oh, okay. Okay, for the priests. Okay. Oh, all right. They paid for the priest's services, okay, by having them a set portion of the sacrificial animals. And then temples earn money by selling their meat to butchers, okay? So anything that would be left over, they could sell it to butchers and then, go ahead and sacrifice these things, all right? Now, remember what the scripture says. Now, when you went to the marketplace, remember it says, ask questions, right? Don't just take something, okay? Because the Apostle Shaul wrote about that, and he says, if it's offered to the gods, you better not partake of it. You need to ask for conscience sake to find out whether these things. And really what he was warning the people is he was saying, don't go to the marketplace and buy your stuff, okay? Slaughter it yourself so that you know what you're sacrificing to Yahweh, and you know the food that you're eating is going to be clean to your family. Because if you go down to the marketplace and you buy it from there, you're going to be buying a sacrificial animal that's already been offered up to the gods, whether they tell you that or not, okay? So you can see how the prophets and the apostles and Yeshua warned the people of these things, just like you see Yisrayl Hawkins doing today, warning the people, be careful what you're buying out there. Don't just go buy this stuff. It's defiled. So they sold it to the butchers, okay? And then, let's see, we're going to jump down to the next paragraph. It says, the religious calendar now, okay, it was filled with festivals, all right? Filled with festivals. And if you look down to the bottom, it says what they would do is they would sacrifice a piglet on the first of the month, okay, on the first of the month. Now notice that, okay? What does Yahweh say to do? You offer sacrifices on the new moon, right? The first of the month and the first of the moon is the new moon. So notice what they did here. They sacrificed a piglet, an abominable animal. And that's why Satan always uses the pig so much, is because it's an abomination to Yahweh. Remember, he says it's an abomination. If you touch the flesh, if you eat of the flesh, you become abominable. That means you can pass this stuff on, okay? That's why you always see where they offer the pig into these gods and these goddesses, because it was an abomination. And Satan wanted to make sure that the people didn't even think about Yahweh, okay? Because when they ate this, an abomination cuts you off from Yahweh. So she wanted to make sure that these people were completely cut off of Yahweh, that they weren't even thinking about repenting and going to Yahweh. She wanted to make them sure that they were unclean. So they sacrificed the piglet on the first of the month, okay, on the new moon, in honor of the household gods, the Lars and the Penates, okay? Now, once a year, the birthday of the paterfamilia, okay, that would be the father of the household, okay? It was celebrated, and on that day, the family feasted, okay? They feasted in honor of his protective deity, okay? So they gave honor to that genius of the family, because that was supposed to be the one that really started off. I mean, no, remember, they had the tribes and they had the clans and all of this, okay? They had the groups of people and the families and so forth. Now, back then, the grandfathers and the fathers and so forth, there was more respect even out in the pagan world, which you see today. You know, I mean, today there is no respect. The young people have no respect for age at all. You know, they just don't even respect it at all. But back then, okay, they wouldn't do that kind of a thing. You know, they had respect for the aged. You know, now that's part of the law of Yahweh, which the house of Yahweh keeps. You know, we understand, we realize keeping that law. But back then, they had more respect. And so that's what this is talking about, is that they all gathered together, the entire family, and they realized that the head of this family, who started off this family, like to say the grandfather was still alive, okay? He was the one who was honored, and it was his genius that they had this sacrifice to, and this feast, and they feasted to the genius of the grandfather, okay? Because he was the one who was responsible for everything. And even the fathers would still go to the grandfather since he was still alive. They still went to him and showed respect and spoke to him about things, dealing within their own family about these things, okay? So it just kind of showed you some of the respect of things that was done that today, in today's society, you don't even see any of that at all. So you just read for yourself here about in this source that sacrifices always implied a feast, okay? It always implied a feast. And now the Apostle Shaul, he said in no uncertain terms that the things such that the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons. Now in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 20, it says, "But I say that the things which the Gentiles," now Gentile is somebody who doesn't worship Yahweh, okay? "The things which the unbelievers sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to Yahweh. And I do not want you to have fellowship with demons." Okay? And remember, he also said, you can't sit at the same table and partake of the table of Yahweh and the table of demons. Or can you drink of the cup of demons and the cup of Yahweh? It doesn't mix. Okay? It just doesn't mix. It can't. And so that was a time of real examination, where he said, examine yourself and to see, so that you can put all God worship out of you. Okay, because he was dealing with these people who had been strongly influenced through this Roman religion. Okay, and so even they had converted to believing in Yahweh, he still had to wrestle with them and get them to thinking about their past and to get out of that God worship. Now, sacrifice is not always killing an animal and then eating its flesh, but a sacrifice also implies that of merely offering to the gods. Okay, if you offer yourself to the gods, like when they offer their children, okay, they dedicate their children to the genius, they automatically committed something right there. They automatically offer themselves to the gods. And that's exactly what anyone does when they offer thanks for their food in the name of God. So don't eat any food that's offered to God. It's defiled. And it is sacrifice to God, whether they realize it or not. And so it's unfit for any of Yahweh's people to eat. Okay? And that's why the Apostle Shaul said, be careful. You know, that marketplace is full of abominable things. Remember, there's nothing new under the sun. Okay? There's nothing new under the sun. Those things were around back then, just like they did today. Slaughtering of animals, mankind's been eating animals since he was put on earth. So the slaughtering of animals is nothing new. And the people of eating the unclean animals is nothing new either, you know. And so you can have the clean here and unclean right here. But if you set side by side, then, you know, it becomes contaminated and it's no longer clean. And so that's what he was warning them about. Now, in the life and leisure of ancient Rome, pages 121 to 122, we find about the ancient pagan Romans, how they celebrated their birthday. Notice it says, the birthday of a member of the family. An excuse for festivity. Okay, it was just a great time to get together and feast. You know, have a party. Okay. It had greater religious significance in Rome because the Romans, like I said, the Romans, they just took in everything from all around, and that's why that's why it was such a strong influence upon people, and that's why it's such a strong influence today, okay? Because you got to remember, when the Romans went out, it's universal. They worship all of the gods. So if you worship every god that there is out there, how can you sin? There is no sin in their eyes because they're giving glory to all of the gods and the goddesses. So if they're serving all the gods and the goddesses, how could they be sinning against them? So in their mind, that's why you never hear them talking about sin. The Catholics don't associate sin as breaking of the law of Yahweh because that's the law of Yahweh. That's something totally different than what's in their life. In their life is based upon service to every god and goddess that there is out there. So they figure if they're doing this and they're serving all of them, then they surely can't possibly be doing any wrong, right? Now, remember when the Apostle Shalom went, Mars Hill and stuff around that area. You remember he came across an altar. Now, they had altars set up for every god and goddess that there was around there. And they had one altar that was set up to the unknown God. Remember? That was in case that they missed any that they weren't aware of, okay? That they had a separate altar set up for them. So in case, that's a generic God. I wonder if it was spelled with a big G or a little g. Maybe it was GG, generic God, okay? But they want to make sure that they got everybody in there. So, let's see where we're at. Okay. Okay. There was a greater religious significance in Rome, okay? Let's see. Now, if it's a male member of the family, remember it was the genus. If it was a female, it was the Juno. And they had candles, they lit candles, they burned incense, and so forth, okay? And this was the birthday party. This is what they did, okay? They had a dinner, they had, they had guests and relatives and old friends. Everybody was invited, okay? And they got together and they brought presents, and they came together and they partied. And that was their party. And this was long, long ago. You're talking about thousands of years ago that they did this stuff. So the only difference, if you could parallel the two, if you have a picture of today's on the left side of the screen and then thousands of years ago on the right side of the screen, you would see an exact parallel. The only thing that would be different is the clothes that they'd be wearing. But they were doing the same exact thing. They offered presents and they brought people together and so forth. Okay, now remember what a present is. Okay, a present is a gift, right? And a gift is a bribe. Okay, so they were bribing the people for their allegiance. Now, those who were still celebrating the birthdays with these rituals, they're still sacrificing to demons, just as they had been practiced according to the rites of the ancestral custom from antiquity. Okay, it's no different. Now, notice here in Deuteronomy 32, because it shows how these things were condemned as devil worship or demon worship. Deuteronomy 32, verses 16 through 20, Yahweh says they provoked Yahweh to jealousy. Well, they didn't provoke him to jealousy, but, they provoked in the sense that they stood up against Yahweh, okay? Because you're not going to make Yahweh jealous. But they have no understanding when it comes to that. With their gods, and they provoked them to judgment with their abominations, okay? They sacrificed to demons which were not of Yahweh, to gods that they did not know, and to gods newly come up, gods your fathers did not worship. So, because each generation could come up with their own deities, okay? And whatever, remember Yahweh said this in the very beginning. Remember in Genesis, he said the earth was corrupt, filled with violence, okay? And that was one of the reasons why they got wiped out and started over again and so forth. But remember, he said from that time on, he said, nothing will be withheld back from man's mind. The evil imaginations of his mind will continue on. And Yahweh allowed it. And so, you really have to think about some of these gods and these goddesses. the concept of them and how they will worship. It's like, somebody had to think these things up, and you can really think on some of them. It's like, how did they do this, and who came up with these ideas, of worshiping these things, and the way that they worship them and stuff. So it's all according to the imagination of man's mind, and that Yahweh, of course, allowed it to take place. And this was some of the newly gods that came up. But you are unmindful, and you forgot the rock that begat you, who was Yahweh, who formed you. And Yahweh saw them, and it abhorred him, because his sons and his daughters provoked him. Well, he looked, he saw this, and of course he knew this was going to take place. They make it sound like as if he's just all torn up. So what did he do? I guess he got angry and ended up, throwing down some lightning bolts on top of him or something. But he said, it's just like the 10 plagues, okay? The 10 plagues. When you think about the 10 plagues and stuff that took place, they make it look like as if in the Christian mind, it's like, well, boy, God got them that time, didn't he? Threw down a little hail and destroyed their crops and so forth, Remember, it was the sins of the people, okay? Yeah, Yahweh used Moshe as an instrument in that, but we know today how these things took place, through the firmament changes and so forth by the microbes causing these things to come about. But it was already defiled because, remember, Yahweh told the people when he brought them out of Egypt, remember what he said in Leviticus 20? He says, don't do these things because every abomination has been created and done by these nations that were before you, which meant the Egyptians. Everything, all this stuff was done by the Egyptians. Every known god was worshipped there. So the whole land was defiled, remember? That's why Yahweh said, don't go back to Egypt. It's defiled, but they went back anyway, right, some of them. But he brought them out of Egypt. And it was because of their sin is the reason why the land, the water, all these things were defiled. Why would frogs want to jump out of the water and so forth when that was their place where they lived to begin with? Why would they want to come out of the land? Must have been something wrong with the water, right? So you can see the defilement that took place in these things, just like the gnats and so forth, driving them down and so forth, instead of being in the air in the firmament where they're supposed to be and stuff, All of these things were affected by the sins of the Egyptians. And so, therefore, Yahweh says, don't worship these things and don't go back to these things. And so he says, you offered your sons and your daughters to them. So look, in verse 20, he said, and he said to them, I will hide my face from them. Okay, it doesn't mean he just turned away and looked away. He knew what was going on, and he allowed it to take place. But he withdrew his laws from them because they chose to worship the gods rather than him. So he hid his face from them, and he says, I will see what their end will be. They are a perverse generation, children of whom is no faith. And that's exactly what we see today. This is the end time generation. It's a perverse generation, like Yeshua said. There is no worship of Yahweh in the generation today. Only the house of Yahweh, those who are called out, we're the only ones that know these things. But in this perverse generation, there is no faith. No one out there knows Yahweh. None of them worship him. None of them even desire to know Yahweh. But the thing is that they don't know him. So our jobs, what Yahweh is preparing us to do, is so that we can be ready, our minds can be open, we can accept the things that he gives into us, so that we can be ready to teach others and allow, so the time when Yahweh opens their minds, they will have teachers to be able to teach them and allow them to see these things and to know these things and to understand all of these things. Remember, everybody who's ever lived before and all the prophets are going to be resurrected. And we're going to bring them up to the same level that we are, so that they have that understanding of what all of Yahweh's plan was about. So that they too can, and then everybody can rejoice, and there'll be no sin, no suffering, all of these things will go throughout the whole universe, bringing forth this message of the kingdom and bringing true peace to everybody.